Where are you going?
How's everybody doing this morning? So you got up early to see me, so I appreciate that. Hopefully I can teach you something or two, maybe three things. Just a quick history about me. I am one of the world's most sexiest men alive, according to Katie Couric's show. This is funny because I was on the show and it was what was his name? Apple Patch, the guy that plays Sherlock for on BBC. Anyways, he was up next, huh? Benedict Cumberbatch. Of course he would know. Adrian would know.
There's something on my Facebook that's obsessed with it.
So anyways, he was up next, and he's, I guess, one of the world's most sexiest men alive, but they said up next, and they flashed this really fast, and so I'm taking it as mine. And you notice I was doing the pose and everything, so I mean, it's just like, it's ready, so. But I'm the founder and principal security consultant at Trusted Sec. I was the former chief security officer for Diebold. I wrote the social engineer toolkit, artillery, and a bunch of other stuff. I'm actually going to show you a tool that I haven't shown before at the end of this that I'm working on that should be released hopefully in the next month or so that I've been working on for a long time. Co-author of Metasploit, the Penetration Tester's Guide. I was a Marine and I've been on a bunch of news stuff. So today's premise, is when I go and I target a company or I target an organization, I need to figure out things of information in order for me to attack them in a way that is successful. And what's great about today's information is that it's so readily available out there that I can profile an entire company, figure out everything about them without ever sending a single packet to them. And so, what this talk is about is looking at how to profile an organization, to target them, find out what defensive capabilities they have in place, and then attack them and get around all of their preventative measures. So everything from next generation firewalls, web application firewalls, application whitelisting, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to kind of defeat all of those today. Go around them and show how you can actually circumvent a lot of the different technologies that we rely upon to really try to protect ourselves. And the thing about it is, the type of technologies that we're investing in, they're not really strengthening our security. They're basically, a Band-Aid for, have you ever seen It's Just a Flesh Wound from Monty Python? So it's like, you have two arms cut off and you're trying to put a Band-Aid on top of it in order to fix the bleeding. And that's kind of where we're at today in security. And I'll show a lot about how we're doing that right today. So let me just take a guess at a company, okay? And this is going to be pretty straightforward. Some are less mature, some are more mature than others. But really, we're going to kind of take a guess at what a company has, and then we're actually going to figure it out. So let me just guess. For perimeter defenses, it's probably your highest, highest security zone. So you probably have intrusion detection or intrusion prevention systems. You do vulnerability assessments or vulnerability scans. It might be tied to a SIM. You might have a web application firewall. You have an AV at the endpoints, which we'll laugh at that later. But you have this as kind of some of your defensive strategy. Possibly next generation firewalls if you invested into those. Most likely egress filtering. I would say about 70% of the customers that we do penetration tests for have egress filtering in place. It's still a large gap of 30% that don't. But still, egress filtering is probably one of the most easy defenses away from establishing a connection on the outside. And then you probably have certain triggers in place, like if someone adds a domain admin account or if someone ports gains on your internal network or things like that, you may detect certain things. But again, I don't know. So let's just say I'm targeting company X. I don't know any of this, but some of this stuff could be in place for what I'm targeting, right? So the first thing we need to do is understand what we're attacking, figure out who we're attacking. So what I usually do when I'm going after an organization is I spend a few hours just understanding the company. Mergers and acquisitions, where the company's located at, different places, just so I can understand the business. Because as an attacker, if I'm going to go after you, I'm going to go after things that are core to your business, things that I can attack, things that I can go after monetarily, whether it's intellectual property or credit cards or things like that. I really look at what I can target as an organization in order to impact them in a negative way. That relies on understanding the company and what I'm going after. Next, after that, you start to move to the social networking sites and look at what type of information is out there, and I'll show that in a second. One thing I did as an example, just to show you how much information you can identify, is I profiled PepsiCo. So obviously, they make Pepsi and a lot of other products. In no way, shape, or form did I hack Pepsi. In no way, shape, or form was this identify flaws within Pepsi. So I'm just throwing that caveat out there that there's no hacking. This is all publicly, readily available information that is on the internet right now today. So there's no hacking involved in this whatsoever. So the first thing I did is go to LinkedIn, which is awesome. And if you notice here, we can see that PepsiCo uses ArcSight for their SIM. So now I know a piece of technology that they're using for their centralization and understanding of how they collect their data and respond to specific incidents. Okay, that's just one of many. Next, I know that they have F5 big IPs. And if you notice here, this is a senior network security engineer. So my guess is that they're using F5s for web application firewalls. They have it in a reverse proxy instance, so that even has a higher likelihood of being their web application firewall solution. So now I know they're using F5s for their web application firewalls. The recommendation section is awesome because people will recommend you for certain things that you do. So now I know they're using Qualys as their vulnerability scanner, and that gets shown later on. Next, I know they're using Semantic Control Compliance Suite, a few other things. They're using Semantic Endpoint Protection. All right, so now I know what they have at the endpoints. Keep going down more. I know that they're predominantly a Microsoft shop with Active Directory Exchange, some Novell NetWare, a Citrix shop. They're using Semantic Vontu for their DLP solution. So again, so I profiled ArcSight, right? Semantic Endpoint Protection, Qualys, F5s, and Vontu. So now I know a lot of their stuff there. They're using CA Federation Manager for single sign-on. And funny ones are vendors. So this is account dev at FireEye who has worked with PepsiCo in the past. So, but it looks like, you know, from what I was able to scrape from LinkedIn and other social networking sites that they haven't actually implemented FireEye throughout their organization. Nor does it look like they've actually implemented any type of next generation firewalls. So using, you know, predominantly Cisco, ASA, and Juniper is kind of the two technologies either for VPN or firewalls. So I know that as well. Next, you know, what I do from there is I look at, you know, what type of information is readily available. Has anybody seen Project Sonar yet? It's a great project from H.D. Moore and Rapid7. Basically, it's a project to map the entire internet without you having to touch it. So they basically port scan the entire internet, but they also pull in other feeds, like from Aaron and who has information, stuff like that. So there's multiple feeds coming in to where you can really start to pinpoint a lot of the stuff that's out there, service information, versioning, everything without ever touching it. There's so much data to go through. It's like, you know, Shodan and steroids, basically. So great project to take a look at the information that's going out there. And then we can start to profile the organization, again, without ever sending a single packet to them. So next, you know, we need to figure out what our plan of attack is going to be. So how are we going to attack this organization? How are we going to break into it? Is it going to be through web application firewalls, having to bypass their preventative technologies and the perimeter defenses? Or is it going to be through social engineering? Or is it going to be through other methods? Most of the time, I would say, is anybody here a pen tester regularly? No? Couple? So, I mean, would you say that you ever break in through network services anymore on the perimeter? Very rare, right? I mean, there's no MS-267 unless there actually was one that we found like a year ago, and that thing's a survivor. But you know, in most cases, you're not going to find a network service level exploit that you can actually break into, hack into, and stuff. So it's going to be either web applications that you find a flaw in, or it's going to be you know, a specific you know, social engineer or spear phishing that you're going to use because the perimeter's become quite locked down. Well, one thing I've been working on, and this isn't what I was talking about earlier about the new tool that I'm releasing, but this is another one I've been working on for about a year or so. And what I've done, and the reason why I don't release it is, does anybody know? Okay, so let's just take the evolution of security products. Well, I'm about to. Nice. Well, this is actually going to prove that theory. So this will actually prove your theory that I don't believe in evolution. So antivirus came out in what, like the early 90s, right? And it kind of has died off and tapered off since. Antivirus is 3 to 5% effective, if that. I think that's being very generous. So if you look at antivirus is what we call a signature-based technology, right? So it's looking for predefined signatures that have been written in order to identify a specific, you know, thing that's been seen before in the past. Does anybody know the same type of technology with web application firewalls or next-generation firewalls, how they work? They look for predefined things that I've seen in the past that are malicious, that are, you know, and they just move to the network side. So they look at network protocol analysis, and first they say, okay, does this match this specific protocol? Is it FTP or SSH or HTTP or HTTPS? And if it's not, that's probably malicious. Or does it meet an actual pattern that we've seen in the past in other places? Does it sound familiar? So it really hasn't evolved at all. And let's just take web application firewalls. Web application firewalls, how do they work? Blinky lights is pretty much exactly it. So it's signature-based again. So it's looking for script tags, it's looking for SQL injection statements, it's looking for things that are predefined as attackers, so they built a database around it. Again, hasn't really evolved much, so we're still using the same type of technology that we built back in the early 90s. To your point, no evolution. So what I did is I took all of the major web application firewall vendors out there, and I sat there and I mapped them all, and I profiled them to figure out which ones were which. So what you can say is, this is this firewall. I'm not going to mention names, but this is this main firewall person here. They flag on all of these things, so I can profile their web application firewall and find out just by sending certain requests, the responses that I get back, if it's this specific brand of web application firewalls. Now, even better, I've sat there and I've written about 52 bypasses for each of the different web application firewalls altogether. The problem with that, though, is as soon as I release those 52 bypasses, what happens? They write signatures, right? So it's a cat and mouse game. So it's like, hey, if I release this, then I lose all my bypasses that I spent like months and years on developing because they're just going to write signatures for it because it's going to make their product better, even though if I spend another 2 hours, I can figure out another bypass. So anyways, I just want to show you a demo. This is a tool that I wrote called Torpedo. What Torpedo does is you can send it into Burp. So basically, Burp it can act as an interceptor proxy in the middle, and you can send it through Burp so you can manipulate the requests and everything. But what it does is it profiles the web application firewall, figures out which one it is, and then from there it actually sends requests that circumvent the signature-based detection on it for whatever you want to. So it uses a combination of encoding, encryption, and other things. So if I run this, let me grab my IP address real quick. And I have a web application firewall running on here, simulated. I'm going to do a post request. I'm going to target the UID parameter. So this is a fake web server I have running. It's just a Python-coded web server, but it emulates a web application firewall. I built the signature base into this. And then response triggers that I get back should be the exact same thing. So if I run it, it's going to start sending multiple requests trying to profile what the web application firewall is. And I've sanitized the data so you're not going to see which one I profiled as. And then what happens is it'll select a specific method. Now this one I used was my first method of 52 that I have total available for bypasses for all the different firewalls out there. And then what we can do from here is do select star from users where username blah blah blah, and it's going to encode it. And if I had Burp up and running, I can manipulate the packet, send it, and it'll also grab the response and send it out to torpedo.log. Now there's a lot more other things I want to do with it, like obviously make it a much more interactive interface where you can manipulate the packets real time inside of Torpedo. So I'm still working on the development side of it, but at least allows you to do encoding and encryption in order to get around certain things that are out there, like web application firewalls. And I haven't included exit apparently yet. Awesome coding on my part. It works, all right? It's a hack job. So that was a web application firewall route, okay? Now, the problem with going the direct route into an organization is that you're typically going to set off some alarms, right? So going into an organization and trying to circumvent a web application firewall or getting access through SQL injection to a backend database, and then from there spawning an XP command shell and getting access to that and then dropping your payloads, everything else, takes a lot of time and effort, and there's a high probability of getting detected, especially if the company's mature in their security program, right? So if I'm targeting a large organization, I probably don't want to go that route because I'm going to be detected in some way. Or if I manipulate and I change my traffic because I'm going through Tor exit nodes or things like that, then maybe it's a little bit different. But when you go the SE route, it's a little bit different. It's a lot harder to get detected in these routes because you're dealing with humans, right? You're dealing with individual people. And obviously, I'm big on the social engineering front, and I believe it's a very strong place of attack because, when I was on the Katie Couric show, did anybody watch it? A couple people watched it? So when I was on the Katie Couric show, that wasn't staged for that girl that we hacked, all right? Literally, she gave us permission to hack her computer. And hacking an individual person's computer is actually very difficult because I have to specifically target them in some way, shape, or form. I have to figure out where they're at, and then I have to hack their computer. So she was actually challenging. So I actually had to send her a crafted email to her email address that looked believable in every way, and I did a lot of reconnaissance on her ahead of time in order to do that. And so I sent it to her, she clicked it, I compromised her computer, or I enabled her webcam, and I was monitoring her kids and everything else, right? But targeting a company is a much easier type of attack because I don't have one person I'm targeting 1,000 people. So I have 1,000 different people with 1,000 different things that don't care about their laptop or anything about security that I can go and I can now target selectively. I'm going to show you a technique here to enumerate specific people within an organization using a tool called ReconNG from Tim Tones. Anybody used ReconNG before? Anybody use the jigsaw capabilities and mangling? Okay, yeah, so it's a great technique for finding information out there. And so that, again, starts to build my profile of who I'm going to attack. So let's take a step back again. So if I was targeting, let's just say, and I'm not obviously targeting, but if I was to target PepsiCo, I know what defensive mechanisms they have in place, right? I know that they are using these specific pieces of technology, as their defense. Now, if I want to use, if I want to start selectively targeting individuals I'm going to go after, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to use a tool called the harvester. Now what the harvester does isn't much anymore. It's a great tool, but what I'm looking for is how your naming scheme for your organization works. So is your naming scheme first dot last name at companyname.com, or is it first initial last name at company.com? Because that's very important for me to understand. So the first thing I need to figure out is what your email scheme is for your company. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and select PepsiCo.com, and I'm going to select Google as my main search engine. And it's going to go through and it's going to query it. It's going to take a second. Actually, I got to get a micro USB real quick because my battery's dying on my Wi-Fi. Sorry. It's right here. So when that runs, it's taking a little bit longer than I expected to. Is there Wi-Fi here? Are you on it? It's all around. It's in the air, man. It's in the air. Sorry, 1 second here. I had internet earlier. There we go. So this works. I'm not getting any good cell reception here. All right, we'll try a different one. Which one's working here? Name me now. I'm not doing anything sensitive on there, so I don't. What's the one with the padlock? There it goes. Okay, I got internet. Good, we're saved. All right, we're going to search it again. And this time we're going to have some results coming back. Here we go. Good. So now notice here, PepsiCo's naming scheme is first.last name at PepsiCo.com, right? So now that I know what their scheme is, just by running Harvester, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tool by Tim Tomes called ReconNG, which is an awesome tool. And I'm going to search for a thing called the jigsaw, and I'll explain this in a second. I want to kick it off really fast, because it's going to take a while for it to actually work. I'm just setting PepsiCo as the company. I'm going to run it. So it's going to go through. Now what I'm doing here is there's a website called Jigsaw, which is kind of like a collection company for all of your personal information around companies and organizations. So what they do is they make money off of getting information about different companies and people that work in those companies and the positions and titles and email addresses and phone numbers. Now it's not a free service, but what you can query is the company that they work for, first name, last name, position, and where they're located at. So why is that important to us? If I know their first name and their last name, I know their email address, right? If I know what position they're in, I can selectively target an individual group or person within the company to go after. So this is going to run through, and you're going to start to see names start to pop down here, first name, last name, and it's actually very accurate. When we do our social engineers and we send emails, we have about an 87% success rate on email addresses, which is a great thing. And now, one thing about social engineering is typically when we're doing penetration tests, what do we typically send to? Like how many do we usually send to? Well, that's good. Most people send it to a sample size, which can be 200 to 300, which is a bad idea. Right? If we're going in and we're attacking a company, we only want to send it to maybe 1 to 2 people, wait a little bit, send it to 1 or 2 more people, wait a little bit, and see if it actually starts to work. Because we don't want to trigger that we're trying to break into this company, and we also don't want to send, let's just say I'm going to show you an example of targeting health benefits. All right, if I'm targeting health benefits, do I want to target people in the benefits department? Probably not, right? So we need to know exactly who we're targeting, why we're targeting them, and how we're going about it. And if you notice here, it's finding a ton of people. Like here we go, it's starting to pull out the information. Here we go. So we can see this person in this department in this location. And it's going to keep going. It's just going to keep scrolling down. And I think with PepsiCo, I was able to enumerate about 4,000 people. So a good amount of people within the company that I can target selectively individually, right? Pretty scary, huh? Yeah? So now I can start to profile this. Now I know I'm going to target these individuals here. I'm going to go after them, and that's who I'm going to go after. So if I start profiling that, also what you can do with this is once you have the list, you can throw into what's called a mangle script within ReconNG, and it'll actually create an entire list of email addresses, contact names, and location and title in a CSV file so that you can parse it in a way that you can start doing your social engineering and things like that. So it makes it much easier for you. So we'll let that keep running for a while. So next is developing your pretext, which is what your attack's going to be. So I'm going to develop my pretext or my attack. I need to understand the company of what I'm targeting, right? I need to figure out who they are, what they've done, and I've already done a lot of that in the early stages, but now I'm basically building a complete fantasy that makes no sense whatsoever to anybody unless I make it believable to you. So a lot of times what I do, if I'm actually building a pretext, is I'll actually have my wife look at it or somebody else on the outside, and they'll be like, yeah, that's totally stupid, I wouldn't believe that, or hey, that's a really good one, nice job. So, it requires some thinking, and it's a fun part because, this is like creating a 0-day every single time, just with the human brain. So you have to come up with different ideas and scenarios that will work with people, especially in the confines of their normal day business, in order to actually go and break into them and hack them. So I don't know if anybody's ever seen this one before. I use this one a lot as examples. We have a whole bunch of different ones. But this is one of the ones that I use that's very successful, especially around this time right now, and especially with what's going on with the Affordable Health Care Act. So what we say here, and we trigger key emotions within individuals, but we stay within the normal confines of reality. So what we say here is, as part of, a dedication, blah, 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 we verify, your privacy information. If the policy is not verified, you will not receive health benefits for 2013 or 2014. This is mandatory per state law. Make sure that you visit our secure site, which is HTTPS. This process will only take 2 minutes. Now this part here is an interesting part. So this right here has to match the company that you're targeting. Now how do I get that? What's that? You might be able to find it on the internet, or just send an email to their salespeople, or their marketing people, or the corporate communications people coming from a news agency or somebody that you would sell to, and they'll be happy to send you an email back with their headers all signed with their information that gives you the exact format of how they format all their emails. That's important. You want to make everything believable, right? This is a fantasy. Then we target their education awareness program, because we say only go to this HTTPS website. A lot of times what I do, if I'm targeting, let's just say I'm targeting TrustedSec, I would target trustedsec-benefits.com, or I'd sit there and I'd find what third party they're using for the benefits. I clone that and make the website look very legitimate. Register a site, cost 20 bucks for an SSL certificate, good to go. Next, I trigger emotions. I say if the policy is not verified, you will not receive health benefits for 2013. Now all of a sudden you start having all these chemical reactions in your brain. A lot of them don't actualize, but you're thinking, hey, my kids can't get benefits, I'm not going to be able to go to the emergency room if I get in an accident, I really need to actually take focus of this. And then I also deflate the situation saying this process will only take 2 minutes. This might be a little bit more lengthy than you want it to be, just based on the size of it, but you can shrink it down a little bit because people's attention span go down quite a bit. But otherwise, it works pretty well, and we have a high success rate with this one right here. Would anybody click on that? If it came from your company? Absolutely, right? I would too. And I wrote it, so I'd be like, very believable. One thing about next generation firewalls before we actually go into the demo. So next generation firewalls, what they specifically look for are things that are abnormal, right? Things that don't necessarily meet RFC compliant protocols. So here's the thing, all right? And I'll talk about application whitelisting in a second because that's funny. But if you look at what's supposed to happen, all right, you have protocols that you allow out of your network to the internet, right? You have things like FTP, SSH, DNS, HTTP and HTTPS. Hopefully you're not allowing any of those out other than potentially, browsing protocols. But if you do, what next generation firewalls look like is they look at the actual protocol itself and they match it up to an RFC specific protocol like FTP or SSH. And if it doesn't fall in line with those, it potentially flags them as malicious or for further investigation. So that's how next generation firewalls work. Now on top of that, they have signatures that they look for known things. Like for example, if you use a standard interpreter TCP, reverse TCP, it will get flagged on that and it will get caught because it's a standard connection back and forth that it recognizes. And the way that it works is the actual connection back doesn't get flagged because that's just a normal what we call a socket connect. But the actual what's called a second stage that gets uploaded to the actual infected machine does get picked up because that's a part that gets uploaded to the machine. Now, I don't know if you know this or not. Has anybody ever used the reverse HTTP or reverse HTTPS modules in Metasploit? A couple people. I don't know if you know how this works, but if you specify it and you actually look at Wireshark, what happens? So it makes a GET request, whether it's HTTP or HTTPS, and then it actually downloads a PE file. So it's actually downloading a PE file from a website onto that machine to load it into memory. Now, what's wrong with that? you get picked up. Content filtering or even the next-gen firewall stuff is going to see you downloading an exe and it's not going to allow it. So a lot of times the second stage will actually fail on HTTP or HTTPS. However, if you specify, and I'll show you this here in a second, I'm going to show you this here real quick. If you specify in your payload enable stage encoding to true, it's an advanced option. What it does is it actually mangles the executable using Shikata which actually gets picked up if it's an executable, but over the network it's completely polymorphic, so it doesn't get picked up. So you're not actually downloading a PE file, you're encoding it with Shikata, which is completely polymorphic. It downloads it and gets around all the next generation firewall stuff. So if you didn't know that, it's a nice tip if you want to get around that. So here it is, I'll just do it real quick. So I'm going to use the multi-handler. I'll set the payload to Windows, interpreter, reverse, HTTP. If I do show advanced, right here. So if I just type in set space enable stage encoding to true, it will then trigger interpreter to download the Shikata one versus an actual executable, so it gets around those. And for a list of RFC specifications, you can go to Wikipedia. They actually have some great ones on the different RFC specs. If you're building something custom, I always build protocols off of the RFC spec. So if I'm building TFTP or SMTP or DNS based off of what I can find outbound, I'll actually build custom payloads based off of the actual protocol. So demonstration. So this is obviously my tool, the Social Engineer Toolkit. But what you might not know about SET is it works in conjunction to bypass basically all of the different preventive measure technologies out there. Like for example, it takes advantage of Java, it takes advantage of application whitelisting, it takes advantage of next generation firewalls, it takes advantage of antivirus. All of those we can basically circumvent and get around. Now interesting enough, application whitelisting is one of the ones I'd like to pick on. Application whitelisting is one of the hardest things to implement in an organization because of how many deviations we have in our baselines of our computers. In addition, it provides little to no value when it comes to security. Now, a lot of people jump and say, hey, I just spent 2 years implementing this, what do you mean? So let me ask you a question. If I'm an attacker and I'm going to break into your endpoint, all right, and I'm going to run an exploit, or I'm going to run some sort of zero day, I'm going to run some sort of attack on your endpoints, what am I going to run it on? What are some common things that I'll run an exploit on? Office, good one. What else? Adobe, right? Java, Internet Explorer, sound about right? So let me ask you a question. If I exploit, let's just say these 4 things. If I exploit any one of these, and I take control of that process, what am I running under? I'm running under a user account, but I'm running under a trusted process, right? I'm running under things that you've already whitelisted. So what good does application whitelisting do other than being able to drop an executable on the machine? Not much. What else is it going to do? I mean, if I have application whitelisting and I trust Java and I trust Internet Explorer and I trust Adobe, and that's what I exploit as my normal attack method as a hacker all the time, my patterns haven't changed whatsoever. The only thing that you've stopped me from doing is sending a zip file with an exe attached to it through email. That's about it. About as basic as it gets. So it doesn't really help too much. Now this attack that I'm going to use is one of the flagship ones, and you might have seen it before. There's been a lot of changes in it since then. And actually this is the new version that I haven't released yet. And I'm just going to clone Gmail as an example. So what this is going to do is going to clone Gmail. Now what's interesting about this attack, darn it, man. I was coding last night, so this is one of the things that I do sometimes. Hang on a second. Just take a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone a website that looks legitimate every way. Now, I don't know if you know what happens behind the scenes, but the way that SET works is if you have a newer operating system, such as Windows Vista and above, it actually makes you inherently less secure. So if you're using Windows 8, thank you. If you're using Windows XP, it's actually harder for me to break into your computer because I actually have to drop a binary on your machine. And the reason being is the introduction of PowerShell has given us an attack vector that we never had before, which is we can basically drop entire pieces and components of malware onto a machine without ever having to write to disk. And we don't have to worry about what security features you have on there because I can bypass all the execution restriction policies in PowerShell. And then it doesn't matter what you have as far as antivirus or HIPs or anything else because I'm writing in memory. So it's a very scary thing because we can basically drop anything that we want to real time in that. This is going to take a second. So while I wait for that, I'm going to show you one other one. Now, what are we taught in education awareness when we get an email that has a link in it? Aside from don't click it. What happens if it's coming from a very trusted person? Still don't click it. What are we taught typically? What are we taught if we see a link? Hover, right? Thank you. So this is just an example of Gmail, but what I typically do when I'm targeting a company is I'll send them an email from the third-party benefits site, and it'll have a website that looks legit in every way and shape or form as theirs. And then it has a link on there, and it says, make sure that you're only going to the proper link when you're going to do this because your health benefits need to be secure. So make sure, and I even put it in there, make sure you hover over the link to make sure it's legitimate. All right? So here I have Internet Explorer, right? This is on a Windows 8 machine. If I hover over the link, what does it say down there on the left-hand side? Anybody see that? Looks legit, right? HTTPS is gmail.com. Our browser is telling us that it's going there. Now, what I want to show you is, watch what happens when I click the link really fast, okay? A box is going to pop up really quick, and I'm actually going to be at the legitimate Gmail site. You're going to see the Gmail site load in every way, shape, or form as real, and then it's going to do a real quick replace in the middle, and you're not going to even notice the changes, all right? Now, obviously, I would register a domain name that looks similar and everything. I'm not going to use an IP address and stuff like that, but this is just a demonstration. So when I run this, watch what happens. Notice I'm at the legitimate Gmail site. Boom, it replaces it really fast with the malicious one. And here I harvest your username and password. So here's the username and password here. There we go, able to steal as an attacker. And we defeat things that we're taught for education awareness, right? So those are common things that you can do that defeat what we're taught in education awareness programs. We know what you're getting taught in education awareness programs. That's why we do things that, differently to get around it. See if this is done downloading yet. Okay, it's done. Cool. So I'm just cloning a website. What the hell? Oh, sorry, I got this still up. Having a demo day today. Never happens to me. All right, it's going to work this time. So I'm cloning Gmail. I'm going to use a standard payload. And what's going to happen is Set's going to automatically do everything for me. Now, I'm going to use a Windows 8 machine, fully patched and all that good stuff. And I'm going to go to this. Now, when I do this, I always recommend using a what's called a code signing certificate. Now, you're not going to see it in this one because I just downloaded it from the internet. But to get a code signing cert, you need to have a company registered, and they do a check. Now, does anybody know how hard it is to register a company in your local state? Not hard at all, right? It's like $20 or $50 or something like that, right? So you get a company. I named mine Verified Publisher, but you can name all other cool ones. You can be like Java Secure or Security Java, Java Verified, whatever you want to do. Make a company name with whatever you want. Just be careful because you might get sued. You put the name in it. But I have Verified Publisher, and what happens is I bought, I registered a company name called Verified Publisher. Then I bought the code signing certificate for $300, and now I got a full-fledged code signing certificate that I can use. And when it comes up as Publisher, it says Verified Publisher, so people will click on it. So it's not bad; it's worth it. Now here we get this. All right, this is because I don't have a code signing cert. But what's funny about this right here? So this right here says running applications by unknown publishers will be blocked in future releases, whatever. But it's still allowing us to. This application will run unrestricted access. The publisher is unknown. If you build this into your pretext, again, still making it believable, like you show a screenshot of this and tell them to hit I accept with a nice little red mark around it and to hit run, they will do it. Your success probability is still extremely high with this right here. It's funny because Java's Oracle has been slowly trying to reduce the amount of Java attacks because their applet hierarchy and structure is absolutely horrendous from a security perspective. So they're continuing to make little steps and strides. But it's funny because if you look at 3 years ago when it was the worst to now when they're trying to make it better, the success probabilities haven't changed at all. So you still have the same success ratios as you did before, as prior in the past, so there's nothing that's really changed, okay? So as soon as we hit run, it's going to redirect back to the legitimate site. And again, we're not running any type of exploit or anything like that. And back here, we get our shells. Goes into compromises, and we get access to the machine, right? So simple stuff that you can do to get around a lot of the stuff out there. Endpoint evasions are fun. Antivirus, there's nothing really to talk about on that. I already talked about application whitelisting. I mean, AV, you could just modify something just slightly to get around it. AV, and even if you want to just do something simple, there's a tool for like, I think it's like $100. It's called VM Protect. It'll actually encase your executable into a virtual machine. So you have a virtual machine that's basically running all of your EXE stuff, and it's got polymorphic entry points and mutations and stuff like that. So it's a really nasty one. So if you just make anything, you just generate a payload, pop it through VM Protect, you're all set. Heuristics don't really work. Heuristics are supposed to be things that look at predefined behavior of an actual executable or an actual pattern of an attacker. Unfortunately, again, very much signature-based, looking at things that have already been predefined. Sandboxing is an interesting one. So there's a lot of things coming out now that are working on application virtualization, right? So like IE becomes virtualized and things like that, which is actually a great concept. The problem is not all of them are fully contained in those sandboxes. They can call additional add-ons and things like that. Like for example, a lot of times if you attack Internet Explorer, it'll still allow Java to run and run on your computer itself. And if they virtualize that entire environment, good on them. It becomes much harder to actually circumvent and get around. Has anybody messed with Bromium yet? That's making a lot of waves. I haven't had a chance to test it yet. That's one of the things that people are kind of touting as being a really great tool for protection. I haven't tested it, so I don't know how well it's doing. But another one that you could possibly look for trying to get around. So custom payloads are things that I work on all the time when I'm doing penetration tests. And one technique I want to show you real quick. Woo! There we go. It's under stuff. Actually, I think it's under here. It's under stuff. There it is. So this is a tool that I wrote that basically will generate a custom payload for me. And it's similar to a payload in set, but it's much different. So it's obfuscated and changed around. Now this thing right here is basically what it does is it takes Python code, okay? And it takes Metasploit shellcode, and it'll shoot shellcode straight into memory through this Python code. So the code itself is wrapped and encased in Python. Now you might be saying, well, how do I actually get Python on the victim machine? Well, what we can actually do is there's tools out there called pyexe and pyinstaller that actually take our Python code, wrap it in the Python interpreter, and now we have a fully deployable executable that we can deploy to the victim machine as an exe. We don't have to send Python to them to install. So if I run this really quick, and I enter my IP address, I do, let's just say, a reverse HTTP. I do it on port 443, or it could be HTTPS. It's going to take a second to generate all the assembly. Then I'm finished. It'll ask us if we want to start the list, and I'm just going to hit no on this one. If I look at this, here's my code that it generates for me automatically. Here's the shell code here that's going to inject into memory. Now, this is a funny one. So if you're ever going over port 21, Microsoft actually implemented a thing called stateful FTP, where it actually looks at what type of protocols are going over FTP. And if it doesn't match the RFC protocol of FTP, it'll actually block that connection. So this automatically disables it in case you're going over FTP, so you can still go out FTP normally. Then we go to our Windows machine here. And it's a really simple command. If you just download PyInstaller, you may have to have Python installed. But if I just do Python pyinstaller.py, and I do one file, and I do multi-pyinjector. So that's all I'm typing in. So Python pyinstaller, one file, multi-pyinjector. It's going to automatically create an executable for me. All right, it's done. You can see here, now we have our full-fledged exe here running. And the thing about this, now notice the file size, it's 3.7 megs. Some people are like, oh, hey, that's not efficient. That's actually a very good thing. Antivirus isn't going to scan 3.7 megs, which is a good part of that. And if your signature's off by any variation, like it changes in any way, you got a good shot at not getting picked up by it, you know, basically ever. I've been using this technique now for the past 2 years, and I've never gotten picked up by AV. So it works out really well. Now, one other thing that you can do that's even better is before you do this, there's a Python program called pyobfuscate, which actually obfuscates all of your Python code ahead of time, and it's dynamic and it changes every time. So look at this. If I run it against this multi-py injector that I just did, so here's the code before. Let's look at the code before. So here's the code before, right? See all this? See that? It's kind of short. Watch what happens when I run it through here. Look a lot different? Completely different. Don't need it. So this completely and dynamically changes the entire structure of your Python file each time. So what's nice about that is then you can obfuscate your Python code, then run it through PyInjector to create an executable. I'm sorry, PyInstaller to create an executable, and all of a sudden you got a piece of an executable that's not going to get picked up by anything out there. You don't have to worry about it. Again, this one here just injects into memory and all that good stuff. There's a whole bunch of different ways for payloads. Like there was a talk at DerbyCon where they actually built their own ROP gadget that disabled data execution prevention in their own application, and then triggered the shellcode to inject. And that's a cool concept, right? You know, there's a lot of techniques that you can use to get around payloads. I just use things that are easy, and that was easy for me. Python's a very easy program to pick up. There's a lot of great, like you could just take, you know, stuff that's on in set. There's a multi-py injector within set. Take that, modify it a little bit, run it through PyInstaller, boom, you got a customized payload. So when you attack an organization, again, you target individuals, you get them to click something, and then you invade the preventative measures they have inside. So set itself will get around it. Did anybody see our DEF CON talk this year with Nick Hitchcock and I? A couple people. We did a live social engineer on stage where we basically compromised an individual, coaxing him over the phone. Again, it was all sanctioned and approved through the company. But we actually did a live social engineer where we hacked somebody on stage, and it took less than 3 minutes to get them to click on something and then compromise their machines. And they had, you know, next generation firewalls. They had virtualization technology at the SMTP gateways. They had everything basically going on there. You know, it was a, you know, just a alarming thing that you can see how easy it is to break into a company. But once you're on that person's computer, where are you typically at? Where are you sitting at in the network? On the inside, right? Now what happens when we're on the inside? Wide open, right? Got access to this over here, this ERP system here, this, you know, account over here, all this stuff, right? So once we're inside, you know, we're in the M&M syndrome, right? It's hard on the outside, super soft on the inside. So now from here we have to start attacking the organization, looking at different ways of penetrating them and getting access to them. So the first thing you do is wedge yourself in. Now, when you wedge yourself into a company, you need to look at different things that you want to go after. The first thing you don't want to go after is domain admin. All right, DA is kind of like that red, you know, that red herring flag that you're going to find on most companies. They look for you to add domain admins. They look for you to add privileged user accounts or excessive permissions to those. So we don't need those right away. All right, stay a little bit underneath the radar for a little bit. You need to remain undetected for a little while. Some awesome techniques that I use. There's a tool called NetView. Has anybody ever used that before? NetView is by Mubix. And so when you compromise a machine, you upload this and you run it. And what it'll do is it'll actually show you all the logged in users in each individual machine. So you can say this user here who's a domain admin is logged into this machine here and this server here. So you can just query it just by being a normal domain user account. Don't need any excessive rights or anything like that. Has anybody used psexec commands with set? You use psexec commands? Okay, does anybody use psexec module? The psexec module by default gets picked up by AV, doesn't it? Right? All the time. So that's a problem. With psexec, what you can do, there's a thing in set, and I'll show it to you really fast. So we go to the fast track attacks. There's a menu called psexec PowerShell injection. And what will happen is, if you have credentials to a system that you've already got access to, you can use those credentials, including hashes, so you don't need to use the actual password itself. And it'll do pass the hash, and it'll sweep subnets looking for machines that you can log into. And if you can log into it, it'll automatically inject PowerShell into that machine and give you a shell that connects back. You're never injecting anything onto disk, and you're never picking up anything with antivirus. So it's really simple to use, makes it easy for pen testing. So I'm going to use the username of administrator, password, domain, blah, threads, the report. So it's going to go ahead and automatically run. It'll specify everything for you, and then all you need to do is specify our hosts. So I can say I'm going to target 192.168.1.1/24, and then I run the exploit against it. It's going to sweep through, starting to inject PowerShell into all the machines, so I'm never touching disk. Real easy technique to get around a lot of the AV stuff out there. Another good one, has anybody used exe custom with psexec? So it's a good one. There's an advanced option called exe custom where you can specify your own executable. So you can then use psexec with your own custom exe so it doesn't get picked up by AV. So using your own Python thing, compiling it to an executable, then using exe custom, you can use it there. One thing that I always run into when I'm compromising a machine is sometimes my shell will die. That's a bad thing. So there's a script that Carlos wrote, Carlos Perez, called multi-interpreter inject, and I actually just did a commit to a pull request to Metasploit where it'll let you set the amount of shells that you want. So you can specify, hey, I want 3 shells to come back every time I compromise a machine. So you have 3 additional shells, so you can kind of work with that in case one dies as you're doing certain things. Also, SMB exec from Bravo Hacks or Eric Malam, great tool. It's like one of the best ones out there in my opinion. It'll sweep networks looking for open file shares, which is a huge indicator for me which ones I can actually go and target. It does privileged user account checking. It allows you to pass the hash. It's just an all-around good tool for that type of thing, for SMB. Yeah, the Ruby version 2? Was it yesterday? Oh, awesome. Cool. So things to avoid when you're inside, port scans. Typically going to be picked up, especially if you're sweeping through the network. I just don't recommend sweeping throughout your entire organization. There's a lot of information you can find out without ever having to sit there and port scan, like i.e. where your domain controllers sit at, what systems are where, NetView, things like that can enumerate a lot of information without you ever having to sweep up with, pick up the network. Mass sweeps of the network, doing SNMP sweeping or ping sweeping or things like that to enumerate hosts, things that you can get picked up on. Adding excessive permissions, uploading malware. Remote hash dumping is a bad one, especially if it's doing LSAS injection. If you're doing the safe ones, like registry hive extraction using like the Metasploit method, that's a much safer method to actually get around a lot of the detection capabilities there. I recently had a customer that had NAC on the inside, and they had a honeypot that was set up in random subnets. So basically, it looked like a vulnerable Windows NT machine, but basically it was just a honeypot part of the NAC solution. It's actually kind of neat. But if I was actually sweeping the network, I would have gotten detected well ahead of time by going after those. Again, people are trying to get more better on the detection piece. You really need to be cautious of what's really out there. And cloud-based evasion. For cloud-based evasion, there's really nothing you have to do. Like there's no real monitoring tools or detection tools that a lot of these cloud companies have. You can basically like run anything you want to. Like I would just sit there and have autopwn running in a synchronous loop over and over and over again against them just for fun because they don't know. Because they have so many different tenants, so many different pieces of application. Now, if you spike it to like 12 gigs or something like that, they might notice the bandwidth difference. But I mean, they don't detect anything when it comes to what you're going after. So free reign, but they have an SSA 16, so they're secure. That'll be good, and it's just magic. Some tips: when you're an attacker and you're going after this, we as attackers, and I say attackers as a good thing, it's simulation, right? Because we're trying to emulate the bad guys. We as attackers have to move with normal traffic. We have to simulate our attacks in a way that looks like legitimate traffic in order to not be detected. And I think that's the way that everything's pretty much moving. I mean, if you look at what I've really had to change as far as my tactics, as far as a hacker, it hasn't been anything really new. I mean, SQL injection. I'm just going to dance up here.
Go ahead and begin now. And if you want to stay on the stream, man.
Is it streaming live? Is it streaming live?
I don't know, but I'm taking care of that part. You're going.
It should be good. It should be good. So, things like antivirus is trivial, but you still want to make sure that when you're actually targeting a company, you're getting around it. So go through LinkedIn, do the profiling phase, look at what type of information is out there, because you want to make sure that what you're actually testing is going to get around it in order to attack it. And that's it. That's all I had, actually. I was like, that was my last slide. So,
All right, I'll tag them all together later on.
anybody have any questions? No questions? Oh, the new tool. Sorry about that. Yeah, I forgot. Totally forgot about that. Thank you. No, I forgot to mention it. So what I started realizing is that, you know, when I start to, especially when I start to do my own pen tests, my own framework, we have our own distributions that we like, you know, tools and versions and things like that we do internally as pen testers. You know, Kali is an amazing distro. It's one of the best out there for sure. It's the top one that you could use. But with it, I want to start to build my own and start to manage my own and keep myself centralized in a framework that I can understand. You know, I missed the pen test directory. You know, going into pen test and looking at the different things that I could focus on. So what I've been working on is what I'm calling the pen testing framework, and the name may change, but basically it's a way to it's a framework for building your own pen testing distribution for almost any distribution out there: Red Hat, Fedora, Debian, Ubuntu, et cetera. And you don't need to know any programming languages, and it's very modular. So just to show you what a module looks like, so it's broken out into, I use the penetration testing execution standard as kind of the foundation for the different areas of a penetration test. So let's just say I want to go into exploitation, which is one of the tools in there. And I open up set. Here's all you need in order to build a module. The flexibility that I built inside of it makes it much easier for you. You don't need to know any programming languages, just how to install set, and then it automates everything for you. So what the type of install port is, where the location is, the actual install location itself, everything about it basically you need in order to install it. The way that it works is, you know, it drops you into a very much looking like a Metasploit type environment. If I do show options, or show modules, sorry, you can see here the different modules that I've already built. You can install all of them. It has different things like recon-ng, you know, set, Metasploit, and these are the ones I've just built in so far, so like dictionary tags, things like that. And what it'll automatically do is it'll install all these for you in your distribution, and it'll automatically keep them all up to date. So it takes a lot of the headache that you have out of, you know, certain things, and you can basically build your own pen testing distro. Now, what's nice about this is if there's a tool that you don't know, it takes you 2 minutes to write a tool into there to get that module working. Even better, say you have your own custom, you know, stuff that you build in-house as a company, you can then put your repos in there, and now everybody can use that specific module, and you can share it. So it's a real flexible framework for actually building your entire pen testing distro, and it works really well. So if I just want to use, just say modules, exploitation, set, you show options, you can see here, the install type, you can change all of those. It'll actually change it in the module itself, and all you do is hit run, and it'll automatically install for you. Or it should. Oh, sorry, install. Automatically goes and clones it, installs it in the directory that you specify, and it's all configurable through a config option. So it automatically creates your hierarchy structure, automatically puts all of your executables in user bin, so you can then launch them from anywhere. So it makes it much easier for you to use. Sound pretty cool? Yeah. So hopefully I'll have it out in about less than a month or so. Just kind of wrapping up the bugs and kinks, writing documentation for it and everything else. So I should have it out soon. All right? That was a new tool. Thanks. Make it easy for you guys. All right, thanks very much. Appreciate you guys having me.